Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Campbell. Go ahead. Not hearing you.
Good morning, Chairman, members, colleagues.
I'm so sorry, Chairman. Could I just raise a matter with you?
Sure.
Right. You just indicated that the OUR will be coming back to us on their pointed views on the right of first refusal single buyer concept. I think you'll recall that there were some other things, and probably we could be reminded, because there were some other recommendations in relation to things like dispatching and shifting that to the OUR instead of where it now lies with JPS. Could we get them to just speak to us in terms of all of those recommendations that affect them? I'm not too sure if those are already addressed by them in the summaries that we are anticipating, but especially the issue of dispatch, where a strong recommendation was made that it be shifted from the JPS code to the OUR, that they could address that. I can't recall if they had in fact done so. And probably before you leave, Chairman, you could just indicate what is the timetable, if any, for the completion of our work. Are we trying to do this before the summer recess, or are we going to go beyond?
I would love to do it before. As a matter of fact, let's just deal with that now. So the next proposed dates that are available are Wednesday, the 5th of July and the 19th of July, both Wednesdays at 2 o'clock, and Tuesday, the 25th, which really would be the last, that would probably be the week that Parliament is going to go on recess for the summer. So that would give us three sittings, including today, making 4. I would think that, Ms. Campbell, based on where you are, how does that timeline fit for you in terms of concluding the matrix?
That should be sufficient, Chair. The time should be sufficient.
So what I would say, Member Paul, well, is if we are going to be sitting on Wednesday, the 5th and the 19th at 2 o'clock, that we wouldn't be constrained by the 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock, but to prepare for the 2 o'clock. So if necessary, we could go a little bit over. And I think that should basically take care of all the outstanding matters. And then of course the 25th.
Unfortunately, I will be overseas on the 25th, but I'm just one person. All right, the other dates.
I too will be out, Chairman. I'm sorry for that jumping in, but I too will be out of country on that week, for that week.
All right, so what I would say is let us leave them. Let's keep those dates. And if it needs to go into the 25th, then obviously we could still have a quorum. And of course, any issues that you would want raised, you could ask one of the members to raise for you. So I would say let us leave these 3 dates, take them, 5th and the 19th of July at 2 p.m. and Tuesday the 25th at 10 a.m. targeting to use this and the next 2 to complete. And of course, if we do run over, we can use the 25th to do the mapping up, if that is acceptable to everybody. And surely, if it is that members are not going to be available, then surely you would be in a position to see where we are with the matrix and what is left outstanding and raise whatever issues that you would need to raise for your own purposes, eh? So can we agree to that?
I'm in agreement.
Fine.
Wait. All right. Is the
Yes,
OUR
Chair.
on? Is the OUR on? Any member of the OUR on to address Member Paulwell's question?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members and the
Morning.
other attendees. I'm Sherry Lewis. I'm Deputy Director General with responsibility for legal and consumer and public affairs. My colleagues are also online. And subject to what the technical experts have to say, in relation to Member Paul Wells' inquiry, regarding dispatching and the OUR taking over the system operator's function. The OUR had expressed a view that that role would be conflict of interest with our regulatory duties. The whole concept of the system operator is supposed to be an independent office that executes the dispatching and ensures that the dispatching is done in merit order. And then the OUR would then have its regulatory function of supervising that system operator. I'm not quite sure, but from memory, if we had pointedly addressed that in our submissions, but I know it has been an ongoing discussion for some years now, and the OUR's position has been maintained by us that really it's the system operator should be an independent body. And that's the construct that really ought to be adopted.
All right, Minister, can I just respond?
Sure. Sure, member.
Okay, well, I want to thank the legal counsel for that report, and you have refreshed my memory sufficiently because yes, I have been trying to get you all to take this on, but you have stoutly resisted. And I understand the conflict of interest point, but can I press you further though? Because right now it resides with the JPS. JPSCO is an active participant in the in the industry, and they too have to subscribe to the rules governing dispatch, least cost, dispatching first, and so on. Would you not agree, though, that it should be placed in a body that is separate from the JPSCO? And even though we don't want to be creating more entities, this matter being so crucial to the cost of electricity to the end user, should we not be thinking now, as we look to beyond this legislation, a long-term situation where dispatching is done by an independent body, perhaps out of the ministry or as you would recommend?
Again, as to where that function should reside, it's really a matter of policy and the construct of the market environment within which we are looking to create. This may be an opportunity for the policymakers to make that decision, but it's really up to them to do so. One thing the OER can definitively say is that it ought not to reside with the OUR. As to where else it should go and if a new body is created, then that really depends on the market construct and whether it is a forward-looking approach that the ministry is seeking to have or a maintenance of the status quo. We are not sure what the direction is, but there have been issues regarding allegations of out of merit order dispatch, and there seems to be some lack of trust in the industry, and those ought to be addressed by the policymaker in the best way possible.
Well, thank God the minister said that he's forward-looking. So over to you, Minister. But my view is that it should be established within an independent body.
We'll take that on board, member, and of course, we can have further discussions on it.
Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to advise, Member Hilton has joined, in case you want to take the JPS letter.
Welcome, Member Hilton. On the agenda today, obviously, was the review of the information received from JPS on the supply of electricity within the SEZs, and obviously, your response. You weren't available at the last meeting, so we'll give you the opportunity at this meeting before we go to the matrix. Or would you want us to do the matrix and leave it to after? Up to you. Not hearing you, might be on mute.
Morning.
Morning, morning, member.
Just joining.
Yeah, no, I was
Apology,
saying. Yeah, I was saying that on the agenda today, we had put on the agenda the response from JPS on your query in relation to the SEZs, and we're making it making available for you to respond to that letter and the contents of that letter. Would you like to do that now?
Yes.
Go right ahead, sir.
And you're speaking to me?
Yes, sir. Speaking to you,
right.
giving you the opportunity to respond to the JPS letter in relation to the SEZ.
Okay. All right. So again, my apology. I have some instrument issue. You might see me on two instruments because on my computer and my phone. All right. The letter is concerning in several respects. And good morning, members. The truth is that JPS's view of the act excludes some very important objectives. The act was designed, well, the SEZ in particular was designed to achieve some objectives, one of which was a production zone, be created as a production zone to address what was very clear to many, which is our inability to compete, particularly in export trade, and to achieve some of the macroeconomic objectives. One of the binding constraints has been, to the certain knowledge of most persons, is the electricity, that we cannot compete with the kinds of cost structure that has been imposed on producers, nor can we attract serious investment in certain sectors because of the cost constraint. And electricity plays a huge part in that. Now, JPS its letter proposed a number of approaches, all of which protects in a significant way JPS's interest while continuing to impose a burden on investors stroke producers. So for example, JPS proposes that one way to improve its situation is by giving the tax incentives, fiscal and other incentives to JPS. Now, I put it to you, as has been said on this platform and in this meeting on several occasions that there are other issues that the sector faces that are not being addressed. One example is the discussion we've had about ROFA and whether and to what extent that has helped the consumer or the producers in this country. The issue of the gas and the pass-through, the benefits to be had from that arrangement. So for example, the parliamentarians, which play a critical oversight function in this regard, we are not even privy.
Member Hilton, sorry, 1 second. You hadn't heard. I'm going to take absence to go to a funeral. So I'm going to ask Member Hamilton to take over for me. And then, of course, I will be updated on the outcome and the way forward in relation to your submission and the others. Thank you very much. You can proceed, Member.
Yeah, okay. So, Madam Chair, I was saying that there are many other issues that has not been addressed. And I was at the point where I was making the submission that the issue of the LNG, the introduction of LNG and the expected impact of that on prices and consumer prices has not been realized. And among the reasons is that this Parliament and this body, we do not have, and I was told in this meeting that the agreement is not available to us. We can't see it. And I'm not even sure JPS could see it. OUR is seeing it. I'm not sure. But my reaction then and remains that is a very startling thing, that the Parliament of the land, with respect to a monopoly, cannot play an oversight role, because the central element of one of the key cost factors, the agreement itself, is not available to the Parliament. So I put it to you that if we continue in this vein, where JPS insists on having all its benefit and protection, while we cannot attract investors, the economy has not been growing and growing sustainably. I put it to you further that one of the reasons is energy, this binding constraint on our economy that has been acknowledged time and again, but we have not found a solution. I thought that when the SEZ Act was created, that gave us an opportunity to breathe and to grow the economy. But what has been our experience? Persons are withholding investment, significant investment in the SEZ, particularly as it relates to energy intensive uses in the SEZ, because JPS insists on having this pound of flesh, which is that it is a single buyer and it should be benefited in that way. And it argues in the letter that the drafters were intentional in giving it that right. And it is the only way to secure the benefits to the wider benefits to the consumer, if it is allowed to continue in that vein. I put it to this committee that if that continues, we will not see the growth in the economy, and that JPS, rather than seeing itself solely as a profit center, must understand that the growth must come into the thinking that the growth of our economy is JPS's growth. Cannot be the death of the economy and JPS's growth. We have to find something is wrong with that approach. And the idea that the only solution is a special tariff, what is called a development tariff, is the approach to be taken. The question is, as in the LNG and other approaches, what of that will be a pass-through? And how would the investors benefit from that? JPS, I think, a fuller debate, and that is needed. We simply cannot continue in this vein. I don't see how we'll get out of this conundrum. And I think a more fulsome discussion around this issue is needed. As JPS acknowledges, the SEZ Act and the SEZ themselves represent the only significant growth pole in the economy. And yet it is insisting that the old arrangements where someone invests its money, their money, because they have the right to generate, they invest the money, their money, they mobilize their client base. None of this are existing client base that they're not cannibalizing JPS's existing client base. They have to bring in your own clients. And when you do that, then you simply hand them over to JPS to stifle your business. International investors are much more savvy than that. And we have not been, to my experience, we have not been able to attract the kind of investment that we thought possible because of this stranglehold on the economy. We must find a better way to address this problem, or we're going to continue to be complaining about the lack of sustained growth in our economy. And I put it to you that energy is one of the binding constraints and remains so. And this, we have to find a solution to it. And this gives us an opportunity to look at this and to look at how we structure the JPS and its operation. So no, I'm incensed at the letter, and I hope others are and realize that if we are not, and we don't use this opportunity to begin to address this issue, we are simply going around trying to catch our tails on this question. JPS has been held accountable, and only this parliament really can hold this entity accountable, because its contracts are hidden. Much of its operations are, and
Member Hilton?
Yes.
Not to bother you, not to disturb you, but the PBCJ is having a difficulty with your camera as we're unable to see you. I'm not sure if it's by design. Oh, okay, they were looking at the wrong one. All right, there. Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Madam Chair. So the concerns, my concerns I'm not assuaged by that letter from JPS. And we have to find, to my mind, we have to have a deeper understanding on this issue. And we have to ask the question, how are we going to get out of this conundrum where energy is concerned? And more needs to be said on this subject before we simply go along with the JPS prescription, which clearly protects JPS interests, but does very little to advance the national interest. That is my submission. My submission is that this issue has to be, this committee have to address this issue in a more fulsome way. And the amendments of the act, of the Electricity Act, in some of the ways that we've been trying to address it, is an important exercise, and particularly as it relates to the special economic zone.
We've noted your submission, member. I do agree with you that it requires more fulsome discussions. I'm not sure whether or not the ministry would have contemplated the issue being discussed now to determine, to give us, whatever feedback or whatever input they may have. From my standpoint, because JPS has relied on the SEZ Act, I think maybe this may require a policy decision, but I think the discussion around the issue may be able to drive whatever policy decision could come out of your issue or your discussion, members. I think it's very valid. Ministry, anybody from the ministry has an input in relation to this, whether or not it has been contemplated within the ministry, to give us some insight, feedback? Anyone?
No comment at this time, Samantha.
Okay, well, member, what I would suggest is, I don't know if the chair would be minded to hold a discussion around this, maybe in a different setting, and then we come back to the joint select with, whatever the deliberations are, or whatever the decision is coming from the deliberations. But I do think it is a valid point, especially because we want to grow the country, and the SEZ is possibly one of the best ways to do so. So I do accept your point. Maybe then we would have to move on to the matrix, and we can take this point up at another time when we are able to have more fulsome discussions on it.
I'm in your hands, Chairman.
Much obliged. Ms. Campbell?
I will proceed. We will continue. Commencing at section 35, and this provision deals with the joint use of poles. It allows the single buyer to enter into an arrangement or contract with any other person for the joint use of the poles, and these are the electricity poles. And if the public interest so requires, the office may direct the single buyer, after consultation with the single buyer, to use any poles jointly with any other person, so long as such use shall not contravene any law. The OUR, in their comments to the committee, recommended that the term single buyer is replaced with transmission, distribution, and supply licensee with appropriate modifications. Now, this provision will also have to be looked at in the specific discussion on the single buyer model structure in relation to the Act. Notwithstanding, based on our review of this document, and we've also considered the guidance given by the Office of the Parliamentary Council at the last meeting, and they directed us to the provision in the Interpretation Act, which states that the single buyer, well, words in the singular includes plural and vice versa. And in that respect, the interpretation is that the single buyer may be more than one entity. Now, having considered that, it is the ministry's position that if there is a future decision to expand the number of single buyers in the market, then the retention now would not prevent any such decision in the future. In addition, we understand that the poles are owned by the current single buyer, and for that reason also, we believe that it is appropriate to retain the single buyer term within the Act.
Ms. Campbell, I recall, I think it was probably the last meeting where the use of the term single buyer was debated quite a bit. I was not able to, well, I had to leave a little early because I had another meeting. So I'm not sure what the discussions were at that point. But I would imagine that it would inform this proposal as well. And what could you just remind us what happened on the last occasion in relation to the single buyer discussion that took place? And then I would ask the members to, proffer their views, if any, in relation to this particular proposal.
So at the last meeting, the decision was for the ministry to consider to go through the Act and to pull out all the references to the single buyer and prepare a document for a presentation at another meeting, and for us to look at the concept throughout the Act and to determine whether or not the OUR's proposal to replace single buyer with transmission, distribution, and supply licenses, well, in relation to this provision, and they've also indicated that the single buyer should replace elsewhere with just licensee, that deeper analysis be done to ensure that there is consistency throughout if the nomenclature is to be changed. And so that was the decision.
Okay, so since that is still outstanding, maybe I would propose that we disaggregate all the proposals relating to single bio and leave them for that particular discussion that will be had, because I presume we'll be going through the same thing as the last time without us having any kind of decision or being able to come to any kind of decision at this point. Since the ministry has that responsibility to go through and make a proposal, I think maybe we should leave this one for whenever that time comes and any other provision that speaks to single bio at this point. I don't know if any other members have any other input.
Chairman, I would agree with that proposal because that was basically what was agreed last time, that wherever we had reference to single buyer, that we would incorporate the consistent concerns in those sections. So if there are more to come, we may want to address them in a similar fashion.
Okay, agreed.
With your
yes, I definitely agree with that. So Ms. Campbell, you could adjust your presentation accordingly.
Thank you, Chair. So in relation to section 37, I'll just mention quickly the same recommendation from OUR is there, but there is also a recommendation from the JIE, and it does not concern the Electricity Act because there is no provision. There is no such provision in the Act. And there is not even a section 37, subsection 4.
Was that an error, you think?
We believe that it relates to regulations which came into force in 2020.
You're a little muffled, Miss Campbell.
We're of the view that the comment relates to the regulations which was promulgated in 2020, I believe, and it's the electrical works licensing and registration regulations, and that has a section 37, subsection 4. So we believe that it applies to that.
So the question, therefore, if you don't mind, would it be relevant to anything that is being addressed at this point that we may want to incorporate?
No.
No? Okay. So have we advised them then that, you know, just to give them the opportunity in the event they were wanting to make any other intervention that, you know, would we reply to that?
That is in process.
Okay, thank you.
In relation to section 38, one of the recommendations from the OUR is that the reference to the purpose of supplying electricity should be expanded to reflect purpose of supplying, distributing, or transmitting electricity. And the ministry has no objection to that. Section 41, and section 41 deals with compensation payable, where the single buyer to enter land for the purpose of laying posts or equipment, felling trees, removing vegetation from power lines. The act prohibits the payment of compensation by the single buyer in circumstances where the vegetation to be removed or the trees to be lopped are within 25 feet of the center line of the main road. Now, JPS, in its comments to the committee, has indicated that the section should be amended to make it the responsibility of landowners and or occupiers to prevent trees and vegetation from growing into utility lines and by extension the public roadway. Where the utility or the local municipality is forced to cut such trees for public safety after giving notice to the landowner or occupier, the landowner or occupier fails to act, then the party forced to cut, fell, prune, or trim the trees, shrubs, and vegetation shall be able to recover the cost from the landowner or occupier. The ministry is of the view that the responsibility should remain with the JPS or the single buyer, and this is for public safety reasons. They ought not to bear the responsibility. The JPS or single buyer would be required to pay compensation for damage otherwise, but the law stipulates that there should be no compensation where the trees are within 25 feet of the center line of any main road or parochial road.
Noted, Ms. Campbell. I don't know if the members have any comments on this. I know this is a very live issue in lots of constituencies, especially.
May I ask a question, please?
Go ahead.
So that it assumes, I think, that the nuisance or the mischief in this case was, well, the specific question is what happens when a new road is cut and brought within that dimension of the property? So someone has lands, their own property. The trees you're talking about are not only shrubs, but I would imagine it wouldn't would it distinguish between shrubs and commercial economic trees like fruit trees? And if the road is then moved, a new road is cut, and it's within that dimension, the landowner, that obligation is visited on the landowner, would it not?
It would appear so.
That cannot be fair. That cannot be fair. That's kind of imposition.
So I guess we're agreeing with the ministry's position on this one, members.
Would you repeat?
I guess we're agreeing with the ministry's position on this one, the recommendation.
Yes,
The status quo remains.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify that.
Yes. All right, you can go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
Sure. So we're going to move to section 44, and it concerns the system operator. The system operator is defined in the Electricity Act as the licensee holding the dispatch license that is a ring-fence department within the single buyer. And we've heard a little discussion on that earlier. So section 41, the OUR 41.1 speaks to the obligation of the system operator to separate, the generation licensee to comply with directions of the system operator relating to dispatch activities or to other functions of the generation licensee that concerns the system operator. The OUR observation concern expressed that the system operator does not give directions but instructions. Further, the instructions must be in accordance with the relevant codes and the terms and conditions of relevant agreements. Therefore, reasonable boundaries for compliance with instructions should be established in the Act. Subject to the provisions of the relevant codes and the power purchase agreement, the power purchase agreement is the agreement that the single buyer enters into with an independent power producer. And the independent power producer generates electricity and sells that electricity to the single buyer. And the electricity is mainly distributed for public purpose. So subject to the provisions of the relevant codes and the power purchase agreement, a generation licensee shall comply with all the instructions of the system operator relating to dispatch activities or other functions of the generation licensee that concerns the system operator. Now, the OUR's recommendation to replace the word directions with instructions is not challenged by the ministry. And to add also that those instructions should be in accordance with the relevant codes. I believe the generation codes will apply here because the activities concerned is generation activities and also in relation to the terms of the power purchase agreement. And we have no issue with that. Section 45, and by way of the marginal note, it sets out the duties of the system operator redispatching activities. So on a preliminary point, the ministry in its review have noted that the system operator, by virtue of section 45 subsection 2, was to have independence. So that was the contemplation when the Electricity Act of 2015 was being promulgated. Now we understand that the system operator activities have not been separated in the manner contemplated by the Act. No, and we also were mindful of the fact that OUR indicated that they could not undertake functions relating to the role of the system operator, given the conflict with their regulatory functions. Now, having considered that, the position is that the system operator, we have determined that it would be better to remove the provision requiring the system operator to be established as a discrete department within the single buyer, and for the staff to report directly to the board. Now, we considered that that should be removed and the status quo to remain as it is, how it currently operates. We also considered and we are advised that the equipment and apparatus used in performance of the functions of the system operator, they're also owned by the current single buyer, and we have not been able to establish where that function would reside if not with the current single buyer. And in consequence thereof, we are proposing that the system operator functions to be performed expressly by the single buyer.
Just before you continue, Ms. Campbell, I think this may touch on concern and issue that Member Paulwell had before.
Yeah, my hand. Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Member.
Yes, Chairman, and it's fortuitous because I really didn't read ahead, so I didn't know it was so close to our reckoning this morning. To me, this is a fundamental issue. And just so that other members are fully aware of what we're talking about, you have a number of players who generate electricity. They generate electricity based primarily on a price that will enable us to have what is called least cost dispatching. Now, the person who determines what electricity is dispatched is the same person that is involved in generating electricity. And in fact, this segment is competitive because you have a number of generators. And I'm expecting that as we expand and procure more electricity, you're going to have a lot more generators whose interest is to see that what they generate is dispatched. Now, if the company, the JPSCO, is playing in that market as well, it cannot be for the long term good of the industry for the JPSCO to be the body that decides which electricity generated will be dispatched. And yes, you do have what is called a merit order that is based on certain criteria. You dispatch A or B above C and D. But those rules are so opaque that it does require a certain level of independence, a level of lack of interest. That is, the dispatcher must not have any interest in the matter so that there can be fairness in dispatching A or B or C. And I think it is fundamental to the spirit of competition going forward. And that's the reason why I was looking for an agency to take it up. And I agree with the OUR that it might very well be a conflict of interest because a dispatch, an aggrieved party would normally appeal to the OUR. And so it doesn't want to be the body responsible for dispatching. But certainly the body that is a player in the sector, and the JPS continues to be a major generator of electricity, I don't think that body can fairly be regarded as the body that should continue to maintain this function. Indeed, I believe that if it were to be challenged under the Fair Competition Act, that challenge, I believe, would be successful. So I believe that this is a matter that is fundamental. We need to ring fence it and come back to it when the major policymaker, who is the minister, is present.
I agree with you, member. And I do appreciate the issue of conflict as it relates to this particular matter. So I would propose, Ms. Campbell, that we defer this one until the minister gets back, because I think this requires some kind of a policy decision on this.
May I just make
go ahead, member.
I wonder, so Member Paulwell sets out the conflict situation very, very clearly. And it's another advantage that accrues to the single buyer JPS in this instance, that further deepens its stranglehold on the sector. But I appreciate as well the difficulty in trying to identify that so-called independent actor in this sector and what the additional cost might look like. But so I wonder whether there's a role for any kind of audit. Member Paul, have you given them a thought? And perhaps it's something we might think about. What is the role for auditing, a very strong auditing regime in something like that?
The problem with that is that's a post-activity. Yeah. I'm very concerned that when you're talking about the present day cost of electricity, you might have done severe damage by not allowing the least cost electricity supplier to be dispatched. And this audit could take a year or two to reveal that there was improper dispatching. So I believe that it must be seen to be fair, and the only way it can be seen to be fair is if you put it in hands that have no interest at all. You could set up a discrete committee in the ministry. You could out of there is an energy council. You could find a small body inside there with the expertise, and it's just about looking at figures, looking at the price, looking at availability, and say, yes, let us dispatch A, B, and C. And you would pay for that activity, but that decider ought not to be a player in the sector.
No, the problematic is clear. I think now we have to, and perhaps we do need some time to reflect further on this, but I appreciate the challenge.
And in addition, members, I think this is the opportune time now that we're reviewing the legislation to be prospective in our deliberations. We have to, we can't waste the opportunity.
Correct, Madam Chair.
Yes. Go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
We move to section 46. And section 46 requires the single buyer to maintain separate accounts. OUR's comment on section 46(1), subsection 1/recommendation. The accounts being referred to are regulatory accounts and financial accounts. In addition to the obligation, the regulator should also have the authority to prescribe the system of accounts to be maintained. This will afford an additional safeguard against the use of systems paid for by ratepayers to earn non-regulated revenue, which is not captured in the computation of returns. Separate accounts should also be required where licensees require generation on a competitive basis to avoid cross-subsidy by the regulated business. It is recommended that the title of Part 8 and the marginal note of Section 46 make reference to licensees rather than the single buyer.
Well, this would still fall under the previous issue that we had. Yes.
Let's now move to Section 47. Section 47 sets out the provisions in relation to codes, and the codes are really the generation, transmission, distribution, supply, dispatch codes. So
we're not hearing you very clearly, Ms. Campbell. I'm not sure what is happening with your microphone, but it's a bit warped. I don't know if anybody else has that challenge.
No,
Yes.
May I, Madam Chair? Yeah,
yes,
we have this challenge, but may I, before we move on from that previous section, I think that the discussion there is a rich discussion requiring the segregation of accounts. And though the single buyer issue comes up yet again, I want to comment on the need for the publication of annual segregated accounts for generation, transmission, distribution, and supply activities. If as it appears, that is not now happening, then most definitely it should be happening. So the issues about how we describe in the margin notes, single buyer and licensees, I accept that that is an issue taken up previously, but the substantive point of that section is the requirement for the publication of separate account, which I fully support. And I think to that extent, I want to comment on that must be supported. The suggestion and recommendation from the OUR must be supported in that regard.
Noted, member, and I think maybe what we should have done was disaggregated the issues, the substantive issues.
Yeah,
yeah, your point is taken, and I do agree as well. Ms. Lewis, I see your hand up. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. In addition, I think that there are additional points made by the OUR in relation to the accounts. For example, we mentioned the whole issue of transfer pricing in section 46.2, which again is another important factor when determining the accounts and what reports ought to be submitted to the OUR. So I think that section as well would need to be looked at and see if the members have any objections to the OUR's position on them.
All right, what I will do, since maybe I was the one in error to have suggested moving on. Ms. Campbell, just could you go back through these two issues mentioned so we can make a decision on them? As long as it does not touch on concern that single buyer issue that we will come to at another time.
So section 46, subsection 1, the recommendation from the OUR is that all licensees, not only the single buyer, are to be required to separate and maintain separate accounts in respect to the key undertakings under this act from their other business activities.
All right, so that's one. So
Yes.
that's one.
That's subsection.
Will we make a deliberation on that? Members?
Yeah, consistent with the point I made earlier. I think even if this concerns only the single buyer, in that it's the only entity that I'm aware of that would have those roles of both distribution, transmission, and generation. But suffice it, again, the language can be broad enough to say that whomever does those separate roles, they have to keep separate accounts. And they have to keep separate accounts. And I comment on the next issue.
Okay, so what we're saying, Ms. Campbell, I don't know if any other member has an input. Member Paulwell, you're okay? Not hearing him. All right, so as it relates to that, Member Paulwell, you're here? Go ahead.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I was distracted just now. And I'm not too clear at the point
No,
you're
it's
making.
in relation to the separation of accounts of what would probably be either the single buyer or licensee, depending on what we determine at a later date. But the substantive issue is in relation to the separation of accounts of the entity.
Yes, I think some weeks ago, I had put forward the view that the JPS, because it is the only player that operates at all levels. They are generators. They are also involved in the transmission and distribution. And that because of that, it is not easy to regulate them properly. Because of the issue of transfer pricing, sometimes you're not able to isolate the levels of efficiencies on both aspects of the operations because of that element of transfer pricing. So I believe the time has come when the accounts should be separated. I had put forward the view that two new companies really ought to be established by them, one dealing with transmission and distribution and the other one dealing with generation.
So in a sense, it would be building a Chinese wall, or this is a bit more than that?
It is akin to...
Companies wouldn't be subsidiaries, would they? They would be separate legal entities.
Yes, and by so doing, they would have separate accounts.
Okay. All right, so I think we are in agreement with that point from the OUR, Ms. Campbell. So we can move on to the other.
So subsection 2. Let's see. Okay, subsection 2. The OUR says in subsection 2, there should be specific provisions for reporting of transfer prices charged for transactions between the single buyer's business to the office and for the conduct of audits by the office. Transfer prices refer to the accounting value assigned to a product or service sold in a transaction between divisions of a company or companies belonging to the same corporate group. The intent here is to ensure that there is transparency in the business transactions of a licensee so as to ensure that there are no cross subsidies between regulated operations and that the unregulated business is kept financially separate from the regulated. It is therefore suggested that the following should be added to the provision. The licensee shall furnish to the office such reports of transfer prices for transactions between the licensed operation, that is generation, transmission, distribution, and supply activities, and between its licensed operations and any other part of the unlicensed undertakings or business as the office designates.
May I just make a query? And remember, Paul may know, but others in the ministry may know. But just for clarity, so when we talk about unregulated and supply, I think we have to have some notion in mind as to what we're talking about. So isn't it that we really, two things come to mind for me, and that is what we have complained of previously about the unregulated nature of the LNG market. And now we see and understand that JPS is getting into other kinds of activities, such as electricity charging stations, which to my mind are not regulated. Member Paul or anyone in the ministry, have we looked at those and OUR and the OUR? Can we give some clarity on those at least two activities that we might be talking about?
So, sorry, member, are you referring to electric vehicles?
Yeah, the charging stations and that sort of thing.
Yes. Well, I think the minister had tabled in Parliament on Tuesday a full policy document which sets out the framework for charging, well, the entire framework for electric vehicles to be in Jamaica. And among the issues that it dealt with was the infrastructure for charging. I am expecting that there will be a debate on the policy, because I have a few questions, especially in relation to enabling a competitive environment for charging stations to exist. But I think it probably doesn't fall squarely within this. And we need to use the opportunity of the policy that was tabled on Tuesday to try to ensure that it is consistent with enabling a fair competitive environment. Yeah?
I agree, but that leaves for your comment the LNG supply situation.
I think there's a bigger point here, Member Hilton, that you're trying to make in relation to the unregulated business function of the entity, right?
Yeah.
Right. Maybe the ministry could give some insight. Anybody from the ministry?
Well, since the OUR is one commenting, I mean, and its role is to observe. I should think that they are aware of what those.
Yeah, Ms. Lewis can probably help us. Go ahead, Ms. Lewis.
In relation to unregulated business, we give the example. For example, when JPS engaging in its e-store activities or selling products dealing with conservation or efficiency of electricity, that aspect of this business is not regulated by the OUR. And as well as where it may have a subsidiary and it may have dealings with that subsidiary, we are trying to ensure that there are no transfer pricing between the entities to ensure that the proper apportionment of cost actually takes place and is borne legitimately by the customers, and that there's no subsidies of the other business. It can also be management services that is being procured between entities. So it's that sort of concept that we are looking to ensure that the right reports are sent to us so that there can be proper alignment and apportionment of cost.
I appreciate the point being made and thank you for those references, but specifically I'd like to know the status from the OUR's perspective on the LNG, the supply of LNG.
If I should come in here, with respect to the supply of LNG, the OUR doesn't have a responsibility for regulating LNG. What we do is to regulate electricity, and therefore our connection with the LNG comes about from the fact that we have to regulate the contracts more or less we have to look at the contracts that JPS has with its fuel suppliers. And that is how we get involved with the LNG. But the thing about it is, the LNG market right now is pretty in its early stages. And when a market is at its, what should I say, in a embryonic stage, sometimes it is good to look at the market properly before you come to a decision. And I think perhaps that is the phase Jamaica might be in now. As it relates to electric vehicles, if I should speak on that, the price for electricity vehicles, from JPS's point of view, this is regulated. We have published rates that JPS should use in the supply of electricity at charging stations belonging to JPS for this purpose. And that is where things are. There's a lot to learn about the electricity market, the electric vehicle market. And as Member Paulwell pointed out, there is more or less a parallel activity going on at another level with the government with respect to how that is dealt with. So those are my observations right now concerning electric vehicles and the LNG market.
So just for clarity, Mr. Wilson, based on what Member Hilton had asked, are you therefore saying that the issue of LNG now, the operations, would factor into this proposal being put to the committee by the OUR with the regulated and unregulated, since you're saying LNG is not something that is covered by the OUR at this time?
No, well, when it comes to the LNG market, in terms of regulatory accounting, that wouldn't be relevant in the sense that the ownership of the LNG facilities is not owned by JPS. So therefore, from a regulatory overlapping perspective, that really doesn't exist. The LNG has to be something separate that should be given a separate focus, and it is not exactly related to the issue of account separation now.
Okay, you just said included no a while ago, which, you know, kind of opened up the doors again for further questions. But Member Hilton, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
I share the observation you make. I'm observing the gentleman dancing around. The question really is, and the committee needs to know, because this is part of what, as members of parliament, we have to, if we're going to monitor this situation, we need to know the position. So he's not saying no. He's simply saying, first of all, he offered a response that the market perhaps is too nascent to be regulated. And my question, anyway, I think I have the answer, which is no. Certainly it's not regulated by OUR. And if it is not regulated by OUR, then I don't know who else regulates it.
It doesn't seem as though it is regulated at this time.
Yeah, it isn't regulated. That is a...
It's a concern. Okay. All right.
But Mr. Wilson, there are some steps or something being made towards some kind of regulation, though.
Well, there has been talks about it, but as to where that authority rests, it is still a question that should be decided by the government.
But there can't be any question that that authority must rest with the government. Must rest with the government. Who else would it rest with? But let me ask you, because you seem to be confirming something that I've been implying in my question. Are you confirming the OUR reviews these contracts? Do they? Do they see these contracts in whole or as in parts? And what do you regulate for these LNG contracts?
Yeah, Cheryl, I don't know if you want to answer that.
If I may just go back before I answer your current question, the LNG market is not currently regulated. There has been draft legislation which the OER has commented on a few years now regarding the possible regulation of the LNG market itself. That is yet to come into fruition. Secondly, the LNG industry, as indicated by Mr. Wilson, that is a separate market and industry that does not touch and concern the issue of transfer pricing in the electricity sector, because there is no overlapping of the companies right now. What the company who owns the facilities has its own business. It is not regulated by the OUR. So it is only relevant insofar as supplies are being purchased by JPS, right? So that's in Nexus. In relation to the contracts, the PPAs, as indicated by us, we, by virtue of the fact that we have to examine the fuel supply agreement as part of the overall approval of the PPA, then the OUR does have some sight of that, those contracts.
Did you say some site?
Yes, we have sight. We have sight of it, and as indicated, as explained, the OUR has a challenge of releasing that information because of the presence of the law in our legislation, which swears the absolute secrecy unless it is absolutely necessary for its carrying out of our functions. Unlike, as we had indicated, the Telecoms Act, which has specific provisions with how you deal with release of confidential information to the minister, to other agencies, and to the wider public. The OUR Act is quite old, and in fact, we have started to amend certain provisions in the Act to facilitate, which hasn't come on stream as yet. But yes, the OUR does have sight of those agreements, and those agreements are only insofar as in relation to our approval of the PPA.
But let me ask you, because it's as you, by now you would have imagined that this is something of fundamental concern to me, and I expect others. But how can the Parliament carry out its oversight function if a parliamentary committee constituted as this cannot see those agreements?
As we had indicated, because this matter was ventilated, I think, before this committee, and as we had indicated to the ministry at the time, that there is also a provision in the Electricity Act that provides that the minister may write to the licensees and request information from the licensees for the carrying out of their planning functions. And so whilst the OUR cannot release that information based on the circumstances presented to us, we did indicate that there was a provision in the legislation where the minister could make that request of the licensees.
Yeah, that is just, anyway, thank you for that information.
I share your concern, Member Hilton.
Yeah, but let me just comment a little point further. So I understand I understand the LNG situation as it relates to, because LNG addresses a number of other energy issues, but to the extent that the power purchase arrangements are in place, I think you're confirming that those accounts, the segregation, the accounting situation that we are just addressing, it would apply, or wouldn't it? Is that what you're saying? That it would or would not? I just need to be clear. In the power purchase arrangement.
It would not apply in the circumstances, because what we are looking at is the accounts of JPS for its various activities, regulated as opposed to unregulated business. So the LNG business is not owned by JPS. So we would not be demanding accounts from them in terms of any business that they are involved in. At least we are currently unaware of them involved in any LNG business. If
But
somehow down the future,
yes, I was just gonna say, even if they were involved in LNG activities, it would appear as though you would still not be interested in those operations because it is not regulated at this time.
We would only be interested insofar as ensuring that the accounts for the regulated business is not subsidizing any unregulated business that JPS is undertaken. But as we currently know it, we are not aware of them involving in any LNG business. So from that perspective, it would not apply to them. If they, for some reason, go into that business and it is formed under the JPS umbrella, or they have a subsidiary, we would want to ensure that that business is not impinging on the regulated business, because our whole purpose, the whole purpose of this provision is to ensure that costs are properly aligned and allocated, and there isn't any cross subsidies happening. So if we remember that that is the focus of why we are seeking those accounts, and then we will now look at the regulated business, the accounts for the regulated business, and any indications of any sharing with unregulated business, the OUR would be interested in that. But specifically dealing with the LNG issue, we are not aware that JPS is involved in any LNG business, and LNG business at this juncture is unregulated business for the entity that is carrying out that function.
Okay, thank you for the clarity.
Just for further information to Ms. Lewis, as you mentioned earlier, I'm looking at the bigger picture now in relation to LNG itself, the market. You mentioned earlier of legislation that the OUR had to give some kind of input on. Was that legislation born from the ministry itself? Where
Yes.
did it? Okay.
It came from the Ministry of MSET.
Okay.
At the time. It's a proposed draft bill. So,
and how long ago was that, if I may ask?
I think a portion of it was commented on sometime during COVID. And then the initial bill which we had commented on was prior to COVID. So my timelines are a little bit blurred. So I would want to prefer a timeline which is totally inaccurate. But I know it was previous to COVID, and then we had commented on another portion of it, which the ministry had sent up to us for some comments during the COVID period.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can take that up with the minister when he gets back, in relation to the progress of that, even though, it's not really a part of what we're doing. No, we don't have that jurisdiction, but just to get some clarity and information, just in the national interest. I'm noting the time. I don't know, Ms. Campbell, how long we're supposed to go? Do we go to 12 members, or because we do have to take the minutes as well, 2 previous minutes? Do you want us to continue with the matrix, or do we take the minutes now and then try to end at 12?
I would suggest we take the minute. We'll try to end it.
Okay. All right, we'll take the minutes.
Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Campbell. I was actually looking for the minutes. I think it's May 10 and May 31. You wanted to complete this? Okay, no, go ahead, go ahead.
Just to round off the discussion here, so the OUR's proposal for requesting the information reports is accepted by the committee.
Yes, I think we definitely accept that proposal.
And just to end 46 proper, the PSOJ recommended that the law is amended to require the single buyer to publish its annual report accounts for its generation, transmission, distribution, and supply activities. It is our understanding that the JPS does publish the reports. So, and further to that, we are not sure if it is that the reports are not available while this comment is being given, but otherwise, we do not think that it should be a requirement.
You do not think it should be a requirement?
Yes, that they publish them.
That they, because, is it because you think that Miss Lewis, Miss Campbell, sorry. Is it because you think they now do it, or you don't think they should have that responsibility?
No,
not clear.
Our information is that they now do it.
So why would the OUR be asking for something that is being done? I'd like to hear from the
PSOJ. Is a PSOJ member?
PSOJ.
Yes.
You have a member here. We should. Have you brought this to their attention that it is being published?
No, we have not.
Well, I think a communication should be had because there may be other difficulties they have of not getting it or something.
Agreed.
Acknowledged.
Yeah, my suggestion is that the ministry writes to them to say that and give them an opportunity to respond.
I agree with that member. I don't think they would have made this proposal if it was easily accessible or, you know, somewhere for them to be able to obtain the information readily. So there must be some mischief surrounding this proposal.
And I recommend, I didn't hear a response from the ministry, but my suggestion is that I think the ministry should, in this circumstance, aware of the information that they have, is the right to say that it is already being published, and maybe there's a discussion about what then is the problem, and see if that, because if it's being published, then it should be made up in publishing ways that is available and accessible.
So as I indicated, we're aware that it's published, so and we're not aware if there is a difficulty on the part of the PSOJ, and as the committee has determined, we will make contact to ascertain.
Thank you.
whether or not there is.
Okay, thank you, member. Thank you, Mrs. Campbell, for that.
Sure.
So we will end that section.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Members, we're going to use the opportunity now to confirm the minutes of May 10, 2023, as well as May 31. We'll go through May 10, we'll go through May 10 first. I'll do it page by page. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. And finally, page 9. I'm proposing that maybe for the next meeting, if we had any matters arising, that we take them at that time. Because I'm sure there must have been some matters coming out of these meetings that need to be discussed. Can I move for confirmation? Members? Member Hilton?
Since I wasn't at the meeting, I really can't
Let me
confirm.
see. No, you were not. Member Paulwell?
So move.
Okay, and I will second it. Thank you. Moving to the minutes of May 31. I'll go through page by page again. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. I believe there are some formatting issues generally throughout the minutes that can be adjusted. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8. I will move to confirm this one and ask for somebody to second it. Members? Anyone wants to second it? All right, Member Paul has seconded the meeting of May 31. I think we had already discussed the dates, the proposed dates for the next meeting. I think maybe we would round robin confirm. Go ahead.
All right, so the committee agreed this morning to the 3 proposed meetings, but just to point out, at the previous meeting, they had agreed on the 29th, which would be next Thursday. However, I've been advised by the chair's office that that meeting is being given up to facilitate another committee. So the next meeting would not be the 29th, as had been previously agreed, but would be July 5th.
5th.
Yes.
All right, noted. Thank you, Ms. Beckford. All right, I think we're at that time. Am I correct? Any other
Yes,
business?
yes. No, yes, Chair. I think you're correct.
Okay. We're at 9, eh? So I will ask for you to move.
I shall move.
Okay, the meeting is now adjourned. And thank you all for being here today and participating, ministry, OUR, everybody that's online. We appreciate the input and the support. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Bye.
Come here. You didn't know that driving instructors have to get certified by the Transport Authority before them can do them thing? Yep, a time for serious business. Under the new Road Traffic Act, only registered driving instructors or institutions are allowed to give driving lessons for a fee. So, make sure you're registered by January 2024 if you want to work as a driving instructor or operate a driving school. Do the right thing. Get certified if you want to teach persons to drive. Let's do all we can to ensure we arrive alive.
Every Jamaican has the right to know what is happening in Parliament, to know when new laws are being passed, and to give their opinions on legislation before either house.
Every Jamaican has the right to see their representatives in action, making laws, holding the executive to account, representing the people, working for the benefit of all Jamaicans.
It is your right to observe first-hand meetings of the Senate, meetings of the House of Representatives, and the meetings of parliamentary committees. You may also take a tour of your parliament.
To find out more about the Houses of Parliament, please call 876-922-0200, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, or visit our website at www.japarliament.gov.jm.
By the Office of the Prime Minister. Your government is empowering you through education, training, and development. That is why we have removed all fees for every Jamaican